And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Pilar Bush, founder of Atwater Consulting. Pilar is a change management and communications expert with over 25 years of experience in the Cayman Islands and the United States. Whether working in-house or as an external consultant, she helps boards, CEOs, and executive teams move confidently towards their goals. A trusted advisor by leaders in both the public and private sectors, Pilar is relied on to develop and lead change initiatives to achieve high-value outcomes faster and with less risk. A certified mediator, Pilar holds an MBA in aviation and airline management and several professional qualifications in strategy development, change management, and facilitating structured meetings. Today, Pilar will speak on building a future-ready workforce, one of the 3 pillars of the Chamber's 3-year advocacy agenda. She will provide an overview of the current state of workforce development and share insights from members and the community about what is required to prepare students and job seekers for the future workforce and the need for ongoing national human capital planning. So please join me in welcoming Pilar to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. All protocols having been established, I'd just like to say thank you for the invitation to be here. I have the privilege of moderating this panel, so I'll start by introducing our 2 panelists. First up is Mr. Woody Foster. No stranger to this audience, Woody is the current Managing Director of Foster's, the largest group of supermarkets in the Cayman Islands with over 800 employees. He's also an integral member of the Board of Directors, and the Board of Directors of Foster's is part of the group that includes Car City, Progressive Distributors, Car Rental, and Home Gas. Woody's also on the Board of Directors of CUC. He's chairman of Life Literacies for Everyone, president of the Cayman Food Bank, and a director of the R3 Foundation. So thank you, Woody, and welcome. Our next panelist is Ms. Juliette Dufa, and she's a founding member of the Society of Human Resources Professional. Juliette has founded and managed her own consulting firm, and she's held some of the most senior roles in some of Cayman's largest organizations, which include DART Enterprises, Cayman Airways, and Hyatt Grand Cayman, and I should be specific, most senior HR roles in those organizations. Juliette was also head of the Technical and Vocational Studies program at the Community College, now UCCI. And in addition to her current role as the director on the R3 Foundation, she's also served on a number of other boards, including the Education Council, Tourism Apprenticeship Training and Advisory Council. She was a founding member of the Cayman Islands Society of Human Resources, and most recently, she was chairman of the Business Staffing Plan Board. So I think we have 2 great panelists to talk about this topic, and I'm going to join you over here for us to get started. See, will this work? Oops. There we go. Thank you. So to get us started, I thought it would be useful to set the context. We are in a rapidly evolving global economy. Workforce development and human capital planning are at the intersection of education, technology, economic growth, immigration, social mobility, and in some cases, even social harmony. So let's start by defining what this is, and then I'm going to ask our panelists to start to comment on where we are in Cayman. I'll leave that up for you to just have a look at. Pull this back a bit. So with that, could I invite either of you to start with your observations on where we are in the Cayman Islands in terms of our workforce development? How are we doing? What are your observations?
So I'll start, and I'll say that the good news is that there are things happening, there are initiatives happening, there are individual strategies that various stakeholders have around workforce planning in the Cayman Islands. The not so good news is that these appear to be very individual and discrete. They're not a part of a national plan. And what has happened is that silos have been created. I mean, that's nothing new. We've talked about this for a number of years, but we now have silos where Governor Owen talked earlier about the importance of communication. And that's so important when we talk about workforce planning. So I'll give an example from my own experiences. Last year when I was chair of the Business Staffing Plan Board, one of the pieces of information that would have been really helpful in the conversations that we were having around the board table would have been, well, for our scholars that are graduating next year or even the year after, how many of them are, where are they studying? What are their areas of study? So that we could better plan then for when they returned home, like what gaps would they be able to fill? Another example was we would get monthly reports of job postings. As far as I'm aware, those, we looked at those, the comparatives would have been sort of for the month, for the specific month. For the year to date, it may have gone back and compared the data to the previous year. But as far as I'm aware, that data was not used for forward planning, so for long-term planning, which is what workforce planning is all about, in order to project, well, what are going to be the jobs of the future, or what are the trends that we're seeing, so that we can better prepare our workforce for that. Another area where gaps have been identified. There was a report that was published last year by the Auditor General. I think it was talked about improving employment prospects for Caymanians. And one of the gaps that was noted in that report was a lack of focus on TVET careers. So one of the areas where gaps exist is in career planning within the school systems, where the focus has tended to be more on white-collar occupations and careers, as opposed to TVET. And one of the other things that was pointed out was that local scholarships, or scholarships for local courses, short-term and medium-term in TVET areas, were actually just made available, I think about 3 years ago, through the Scholarships Secretariat. And then another interesting statistic was, and I can't remember which report this was from, but in fall of 2023, 50% or almost 50% of persons that were unemployed in the Cayman Islands fell either within the age group of 15 to 24 or over 55. And what that tells us is that we're not doing a good enough job in preparing our young Caymanians that are entering the workforce in that 15 to 24 age range. And we're not doing a good job in preparing Caymanians that are already in the workforce, that are a more advanced stage in their career. We're not giving them opportunities for retooling to gain employment or remain employed. So that's sort of just a synopsis and sharing some of my experiences as to where I think we are and what the current state is.
So this topic is obviously so big that we got together yesterday just to make sure that we would be able to do a reasonably good job in tackling this topic. And what you've just shared with us, Juliette, are examples of where you think there is either a recognition of what the issues are or a barrier to helping us be more effective, right? So is there a single entity that is responsible for workforce development in the Cayman Islands? Either one of you can take this.
I would say no, would be my easy answer. But before I respond to that, I'd like to go back really to something that Juliette just said in terms of the early years of our young people and then our older ones being sort of the biggest issues.
I'm over 50.
Older, I said older.
Okay.
Apply that how you feel you need to. I am quite young at 55, what I'm saying. But when we look at our census within Foster's, our biggest turnover is in our young people. Let's call that the 18 to 25 age group. And we're really struggling with that and pounding our head and beating ourselves up for not doing a good enough job and whatnot. And I think what we took from that in all of our discussions is these are also our most immature, because they're just coming, they're just entering the workforce. They don't really know how to hold a job and whatnot. But yet and you'll hear this theme later, is patience. And so we don't really have a lot of patience for not showing up to work, not being there on time, not being resilient, whatever, soft skills. At the end of the day, we need cornflakes on the shelf. Excuses don't get them on the shelf. So we're not very patient. But then when we look back at, well, do we want to do better at this? We're going to have to build in some patience somehow. So I think that's something to just marinate on through the day. To answer your question, is there one body that's focused on this? And I would say the answer is no. Because I think as Cayman has been successful for however many decades we've been successful, I think in large part that's what people are allowed to do what it is that they need to do without a lot of bureaucracy. Just get on with your business, run your business, and do what you got to do. Yay, that's good. The problem with that, however, is someone has to keep it on the guardrails. And if it's just left up to market forces, the market simply doesn't care. The market is selfish. They're taking care of themselves. And so if you want there to be some type of guardrails put in place, some entity led by someone, because I can't be run by committee, we all agree that committees do not run things, somebody has to take the mantle. But we equally can't just simply blame it on education and immigration. It's so much bigger than that. There's an ecosystem, and we are all involved in workforce, whether we like to agree to it or not. Because it's easy to simply say, well, I gave them the opportunity and he failed. That's not my problem. That's their problem. That's John Gray High School didn't train him well enough, or work didn't do, whatever.
Or parents, or
whatever.
No.
We are all involved in workforce planning, whether we agree to it or not. And I think that's something that we also need to marinate on and just stop blaming other people. Let's look at how we all tap into that workforce ecosystem, because it's an ecosystem. It's no different than how the Cayman Islands functions with mangroves and the sea and all the whatever. Everything happens together in harmony. You take any components out of that and things start to fail.
So we were talking about this yesterday and we agreed it needed a visual. And this is the visual that I prepared to try to capture what both Woody and Juliet believe to be the ecosystem. Not relationships, not necessarily proportionate, but these are all the players and stakeholders. So do you want to just touch on this a little bit more, Woody?
Well, I mean, the examples are endless, right? And please forgive me, my memory is really terrible. I can't remember, and there was only 2 speakers ahead of me, so that's really bad. But somebody mentioned TVET. And I've been fighting for TVET in our education system for decades. Why the Cayman Islands doesn't look at TVET as a functioning part of our education ecosystem is beyond me, because we really just focus on mainstream education. We don't start thinking about TVET until post-secondary, and really that's in the vein of them looking at them or they've already failed everything else, so let's see if we can give them this. Mm-hmm. How ridiculous is that? We have to spend money and time and energy on when they're really within our grasp of foundation building and start working in them earlier from secondary. As far as I'm concerned, you should start from primary. But at the very least, secondary. Why are we waiting until post-secondary failing? Makes no sense. And TVET is so important. That's plumbers, electricians, nursing. It's so broad.
Nail technicians, very important.
It's massive. So anyway, don't get me started on this. But there's a private sector. How are we interacting with these students? How are we interacting with the schools? Are we raising our hands and said, listen, hey, I'd like to come and speak to your students, not once to say that you've ticked the box and you've done it, but sustainably, like an active part of what's going on in the curriculum. Parents or guardians, Are you looking at the things that your children do, whether they're in our bagger program or whether they're gymnastics or football or whatever it is that they're doing? Are you making sure that they take it seriously, that it's not like, oh, well, I can't show up today, I got a headache? That's going to show up in the workforce. How you deal with that. So it starts way back here, not here where you're blaming education and immigration.
You have a point of view on resilience as well, right? Like parents and guardians can build in resilience, because what did you share with Juliette and I, that you were seeing some of our young people are unable to handle pressure? I think we're talking about, so how do we help them develop the capacity to handle pressure?
Well, it starts early, right? So that they know it. And this isn't you yelling at them to get in the car because we got to go to school. It's deeper than that, but at least when we see it, you know, because we hold them accountable to things, whether it's showing up in time, whether it's doing their job properly, whatever. And then when you get a bit aggressive with them, they can't handle that. And they're like, I don't need this. And off they go. But remember, and we'll probably talk about this again later too, because there are more jobs in the Cayman Islands than there are Caymanians, we must hire from overseas. And we are hiring from 8 billion strong of people that need to work for whatever reason. And they're coming with or without education. And even those that don't come with education, they're coming with a fire and a hunger to get ahead. And so if our children are not prepared to outwork them, they are going to get left behind. You call it whatever you want. It is what it is.
Thank you. So we talked about this already. And it turns out that if you just look at websites and the responsibilities, there is one entity that has the line, as well as workforce development in the Cayman Islands, in their mission. That's the Ministry of Border Control, Labor, and Culture. So we also know that chamber members in a recent survey have all asked for, in various ways, when you read through the comments, it's a theme. There are a couple of themes. One is a request to look at the education system and to look at what is being taught in schools. Another one is a chorus of, we need effective programs to retrain and upskill, and wanting a strategy and effective programs. So we believe that there is a ministry that has this as this remit. To be fair, it's a big ministry with a number of other things in it. But even though there is a ministry, would you say that there is a clear strategy? I think, Juliette, your view is that we don't have a single cohesive strategy as yet. We've got pieces. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So maybe, Woody, let me ask you this. Have you ever been asked, what do the jobs, or have you ever been asked or required to think about in your own business the jobs of the future, and how are you thinking about that?
Sure. I'm not really very smart, so I don't really think too far.
But you have a human capital plan at Foster's.
Into the future. So, I mean, really, and I actually was on a panel at UCCI about AI, and I don't know why they asked me to come to an AI panel, because I am not prepared for that. But really, it was talking about workforce. And from my vantage of being somebody who hires people, and a fair amount of people, I don't know that we should necessarily worry about the future and the jobs of the future and what it's going to take. I think what we should worry about is who we are as individuals, because at the end of the day, that's all you can control, is yourself. And how do we show up at the job? Are you providing value to that job or not? Because if you're not, somebody else will. So how do I do that? And these are the soft skills. These are the resilient things. These are the things that make you you, that when the employer says, I want that guy, he might not have the or lady, excuse me, may not have the education, but they're willing to do whatever is thrown at them and turn that into something else. So it's your personal branding as an individual. How are you going to make a difference to that workplace? For me, that's really important.
And that's time and time again what we hear from employers is, the technical skills we can teach, but it's the other skills, it's the soft skills that we need from the people that are coming in, from the workforce that are coming in, the young people that are coming in, And that's something that I don't know if it's even taught in schools today.
Well, I've gotten ahead of myself because we're going to come specifically to skills, but the Chamber wanted me to ask you both whether you thought, in the context of Cayman, not an individual business or not even an industry, if you thought that having a human capital plan for the country, and by that we mean a plan where we've assessed the human resource needs across industries, we've inventoried the different types of jobs, we've mapped the skills required, we've aggregated all of that, and we have a forecast, and then we develop a plan. Do you think that if we had that, that would solve our problems? Would it go a long way to solving our problems?
I think that it would. I think that, one of the important things about a plan like this is that it has to be a national plan. It can't just be sitting in one ministry. And we'll talk about this a little bit more as well. There has to be, I think as we discussed yesterday, there has to be a captain, right? There has to be somebody driving this. But there's so many, we looked at the ecosystem, there's so many stakeholders that there has to also be that collective responsibility across all of the stakeholders that participate in that plan.
To make sure we get there. So one of the things, this is the skills part, if you just look at the bottom, the IMF estimates that 2/3 of the world's youth lack the skills they need for life and for the workforce. Essential skills are considered things like time management, executive functioning, metacognition, and yet those aren't taught in schools. This is from an organization called Como Learning, where they are working with schools to build in teaching those skills without it being a burden to the teacher, right? So the teacher can do what they're doing with their existing curriculum, and then they layer in these types of things. So this is some of their research. And surprisingly, 80% of university, or those bound for university, are also not prepared. You know, how many of you as parents do your best before you send them off, only to get the stressed out call when they get there, whether it's about laundry or time management or come exam time. So we really do have a need to pay more attention to the skills, right? And Woody, you shared with us a great little clip that I want to share. It is from, I think, the chief economist at LinkedIn, an organization that certainly sees a lot of people in the context of work and training. And if this works with the sound, it did not. Can you do that for me? I'm not doing anything. You're going to go forward one?
Here are some of the most in-demand human skills that we see on our platform. Every year since I've joined LinkedIn, communication has been number one. It's number one for economists, it's number one for marketers, it's number one for sales. Communication is the number one most in-demand human skill that we see. Yes, there were other skills in demand. It's not just communication, but if we're talking about these human skills, this is the number one, followed by teamwork, leadership, things like that. My favorite is actually problem solving. I think that one is huge. I will tell you, people ask me all the time, what should I have my kids study in school? What's this, the jobs of the future? And the answer is, nobody actually really knows what the jobs of the future are going to be. But what we all know is that if you are someone who's able to do abstract problem solving, you will always have a job. That's my answer.
What do you think of that, audience? Yeah? So, Woody and Juliette, continuing. Do you think we're falling behind? President Joe talked about the fact that former President Angelin mentioned this 20 years ago. I think it was 21 years ago. And you shared with us an article from the Nor'Wester, which was 1976, I think. So where are we? Are we a little behind?
I'll take a quick pause and just give Matthew Seals a little plug. Matthew Seals, the son of Desmond Seals, who used to have the Nor'Wester magazine in the 70s and 80s, for those of you who were around then. So Matthew has very kindly printed those and does whatever it is that he does, and he's put it on Facebook. And if you haven't looked at it, go on Nor'Wester, Remembering Nor'Wester magazine, that's N-O-R-Wester. It's amazing because it gives you a glimpse into kind of who we were back 50 years ago, and there's some really amazing stuff in there. And as I was going through those, because I really have been enjoying them, we've come across a whole bunch of education articles, and this is from one of those. And in 1976, they were talking about the graduating class of 1976 at Cayman Islands High School. And we've sort of outlined something there that is in that article. And he pointed out that 125 graduating students, 44 were still unemployed. 43 had chosen to continue their education, 8 entering universities and colleges, 8 going into sixth form, and 27 repeating their 5th year. Anyway, 50 years ago, we were talking about the same things that we're talking about today. So are we falling behind? Well, did we ever catch up? That's an interesting question, right? And this, remember now, is 1976. So this is really before we started having mass immigration. So that just compounded the problem. I don't know. You tell me.
I would add to that, we're falling behind, we're losing ground. I had an opportunity about 3 years ago to work on a private sector project that looked at awareness and training initiatives in the hospitality industry. And now bear in mind that this was after COVID. So a part of the project for me was to assess what initiatives were currently in place. Some of those things have been put on hold because of COVID. But one of the things that struck me was that there seemed to be less focus on creating that awareness, on creating that interest. There seemed to be less initiatives and programs at a national level than there were 15 years ago. And 15 years ago, that's a point for me, a reference point for me, because 15 years ago would have been when we had programs in place like the tourism apprenticeship program. I think there was a Pride, that was around about the time that the Pride training program came into being. I remember about 15 years ago things happening like the Ministry of Tourism networking events that would happen across the industry. And even if I think back to 30 years ago, which is about when I started in the workplace, and my first job was working in the hospitality industry in the hotel. You know, some of the things that were happening at that time, I will never forget Mrs. Alma McKenzie, because I remember coming back from university and she was so happy that there was somebody who was Caymanian, who was working in the hospitality industry, who had a university degree, that she decided that I needed to go to my former high school and talk to the assembly there. Talk about getting over public speaking anxiety really early in your career, try that one. But that was the era of Tourism Awareness Week. I think at one point it was Tourism Awareness Month. So there were initiatives where at a minimum once a year, and there were other programs that would happen throughout the year, but at least once a year, the focus would be on helping to create that excitement and conversation around jobs and careers in the hospitality industry. And I'm not saying that we should be doing the same things that we were doing 30 years ago or even 15 years ago. You know, a lot of the things that we talk about requires adaptability, requires, President Lawson talked about innovation, the importance of innovation. So I'm not saying we need to be doing the same things, but it feels as though we've taken our foot off the gas, and this is just in one industry at a time when we're increasing airlift, we're increasing hotel rooms. We hear from our visiting tourists that they want to see Caymanians in our properties. So, you know, again, this is just one example of how I feel that we are falling behind.
And to your point that the highest unemployment is sort of 15 to 24 over 50, the innovation might be that we're not asking people to stay in an industry all the way through. They might come in, spend 4 to 5 years, go do something else and do something else, right? You don't stay in one career all the way through.
Maybe a gap year between high school and college, you know?
Yep, yep. Just before we move into looking at the future, Woody also found a second Nor'Wester article. Woody, do you want to talk to us about this?
Well, this one wasn't specific to Cayman, and I don't know who this individual was. I think it was only was 3 at the time, so I really wasn't reading Nor'Wester magazine. But in going through, I found this, and I found it really interesting. And so as we were having our conversations, I was like, you know, I read this article, and I think I thought it was really important. And you can see for yourself, it says, if our investment in education is adequate, and for me, adequate's not good enough, it needs to be a little bit more than that, we get a long-term return that is second to no other. For we are investing in the lives of men and women. We are investing in their productive capacity. We are investing in the homes and families that they will build. We are investing in the contribution that they will make to the culture of the nation. In short, we are investing in the ideas and beliefs of our civilization. It's not just about education. It's so much bigger than that. And if it's bigger than that, we need to play a bigger part.
Thank you. So we've talked about human capital planning. We know what that entails. I just put this up here before we move into the next phase, which we challenged ourselves to not sit here today and talk about what is or what has been, but actually to take up the offer from the Chamber and develop a set of ideas and recommendations about how we as a country, we heard the governor as well challenge us all to work together, how could we as a country change things going forward? So in the time that we have left, I'm going to invite our panelists to share with us a little bit more on the steps you've identified. You've identified 7 steps, and you said the first one was to define success.
So I'll take that one. I think before we define success in relation to workforce development, we have to define success in relation to our country. What do we want Cayman to be like in 10 years, in 25 years? What does it feel like to live in Cayman? What do we want the opportunities to be? And then once we define that, and I liked, again, I think it was President Lawson that said, let's not wait for someone to hand us a vision. We have to decide what it is we want Cayman to be. But once we define that broader context, then we can define a plan that helps us to get there, that helps us to produce the outcomes and provide the initiatives and opportunities that will help us to create that community that we want to live in and that we want to be a part of in 10, 25, 50 years down the road. I think an important part of that when we talk about defining success, and we can come back to this later as well, but we have to be able to measure what that success looks like. What are the metrics? What data? How do we know that we are actually moving towards the community that we want? How do we know that our plan for human capital is actually working?
Okay, thank you. So if the first step is to define success, Woody, I know you have thoughts on what the second step is. You want to share that before I put it up?
Stop whining about the past. Never mind all my stuff about the Northwestern magazine, but stop blaming everybody. It's not this politician's fault or this government's fault or this whatever.
School principal.
Cares?
Yeah.
Like, who cares? It's gone. You can't change that. Well, let's put our finger on the time today and the date today, and let's look forward. Because at the end of the day, that's all you can change, and that's all that matters. So stop blaming any and everybody. I'm in a whole bunch of WhatsApp groups, and all of the experts are on WhatsApp. They're all there. They know all the problems. But we need to come together.
So we're going to stop that.
Yeah.
So step 3, as a group, you said?
Well, find a root cause, which does go into the past. But you got to know your past to know you're going to start with your future. So it's important. We got to connect all these dots. For me, this goes back to the ecosystem of not just picking on work or picking on the education system. It's looking at all of us together collectively in whatever part it is that we play. Because I don't know that necessarily for things to work, that the really important people are more important than the not so important process. Because without them all linked together cohesively, they don't really work. My brain lives in a cartoon world, right? I need all of these analogies and all of these stories for my brain to function. And so apologies, bear with me. So watching, I think the cartoon was Happy Feet, I think it was, you know, with the little penguins and whatever. So at the very end, there was this whole pileup of shrimp and whatever underneath the ice. And there was one last little shrimp that came on and attached. And that one last little shrimp attaching just created this cataclysmic thing. None of it would have happened had it not been this one last little shrimp. So how important is that guy? Not. Who would even know he ever existed? But it was the cause of everything to happen. So if you take that stupid cartoon and apply that to us in this world, it's all of these things connected, working in harmony that make it work. So it doesn't need all of the power brokers or the decision makers or the fancy politicians. It's all of you helping in the system. I'm going to say that over and over and over and over again until it sinks into us as a country. Collective will make a difference.
Yep. And that's starting with the right assumptions, right? So thank you for that, Woody. And it is about making sure we have the right assumptions. One of those assumptions that you talked about was, do we assume we want growth? The governor talked today about us being in a very polarizing time, not just in the world, but we even see this polarization happening in Cayman. There's some people who think it's going too fast and we should slow it down. I mean, how do we develop a workforce strategy? What assumptions should we use? Do you have ideas on one or two assumptions that are important for us before we start tackling this?
Well, I think the first assumption needs to be, do we in fact want continued growth? I believe the easy answer would be yes, but in a lot of conversations for those that feel disenfranchised, the answer could be no, right? But it would really be good to find a way to look at, well, what does no actually mean, right? If we stop growing, what does that mean? There's ramifications to that. Mm-hmm. So if we assume that we want continued growth, well, we need to state that. We need to understand that.
Mm-hmm. And certainly that is the view of the Chamber. We've heard that for many, many years, that we do want growth. We might have to define it, calibrate it differently, but one of the assumptions to developing this workforce development strategy and a human capital plan would be that the Cayman Islands does want to continue growing.
And I think
other assumptions?
And I think linked to that one is that if we assume that we want to continue to grow, and that could be managed growth, if we assume that, one of the points that we made earlier is that today we do not have a population growth that will at any point in the near future give us the Caymanians that we will need to fill all of the jobs that exist. And so another assumption has to be that we will continue to rely on imported labor.
Yeah,
Right.
Good. I think it's important for us to have the conversation with these types of assumptions so that we don't get together thinking, well, some of us want to go backwards or some of us want to revert to protectionism. We heard the governor talk today about free trade, and that includes, to a degree, free trade in labor, right? We would need that for economy. So you had a fifth suggestion or step, and that was to identify the right stakeholders. This is to your ecosystem again, Woody.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, but could we go back to the assumptions? Because I think
sure.
we have a few more. I know I have a few more. So the last point that I made is assume that we will continue to need, people that are coming into our country to fill jobs. But I think the other assumption that hopefully we can make, and again, this comes down to a lot of you in this room, is I hope that we can assume that the majority of employers are willing to and want to hire Caymanians that are capable and are willing to do the job, do the work. And that has to be one of the assumptions I think that we start out with.
That's an important one because
I think that's really important.
Yeah,
because
really important.
I think there is a huge misconception that businesses don't want to hire Caymanians. Mm-hmm. And that is something that we do need to grapple with and probably have a further conversation on. But I think it's a correct assumption that businesses, by and large, there are rogue players out there is in everything, that want to hire Caymanians.
Yeah, thank you. And did you have one more?
Yes,
more?
I do. So this one is something that I have sort of held passionate for a while. Whatever the solutions are, whether that's developing a national human capital plan, it cannot be dependent on a 4-year cycle. It cannot be dependent on, which government is in power, which politician is responsible for which ministry, which chief officer is in place. It has to live beyond our political cycles, and it has to be something that everybody supports and buys into. So that has to be one of our assumptions.
Well, if I could add real quick that we're obviously about to hit our political 4-year cycle, right? We're in it. I see a whole bunch of political wannabes in here, whatever. So really, this doesn't need to just be bipartisan on my whole ecosystem cohesion thing. We need to be omnipartisan, right? So we can transcend political cycles to where both parties, whether you agree on whatever, is that we're pushing forward with a plan.
Yeah, thank you. And that applause was led by the Deputy Premier, so that sounds like you believe that that is the way to go. I think that is very important. Our students are in school for more than 4 years. Some of the training opportunities will evolve over time, so thank you.
And maybe linked to that last point as well, Pilar, is I think another assumption that can be made is that there's already a lot of good information and data and initiatives that are out there. And we need to use what we have already. We don't need to reinvent the wheel in every situation. So,
yeah,
again.
Thank you. So now that I've allowed you to share the assumptions that you wanted us to start with, what next? Your next one was to identify the right stakeholders, and Woody, we cannot run it by a committee.
I got a lot of opinions. I think that's really important, and there may be some pushback today, I'm not sure, but I believe we have to get stakeholders who are willing, but I believe that the government is the right entity, shall we say, to drive this. Because at the end of the day, private sector is private sector, and they care about what they care about in their vein, where the government, who takes a beating all the time about everything, and God bless you guys, they don't have the luxury of only thinking narrow-mindedly about what's important to them, because they have to think about everybody in all of the instances, which is what makes their job so difficult and why they get beatings all the time, because everybody's only interested in themselves, right? And they got to answer to everything. So I believe that they are the right entity to take it on, but we need to find a way for them to do that with an actual leader. But I think what's most important in there is that they can cut through their own quagmire of all of the entities speaking cohesively, and not this silo with this silo and this silo, and says, yeah, because I've been on lots of committees, and we say, these are the things we need to do, and yeah, we agree, but that's works. I can't really mess with that, or this one is this one, so I can't. But how are we going to work this if you guys aren't speaking? I don't know, but I can't get into that. That's somebody else's. That's some other chief officer. If we don't fix that, then we might be up here for really no reason.
Thank you. Good. And I will echo something you said yesterday. I had the privilege of serving for 2 years in the government from 22 and 23. You said yesterday, Woody, and I want to echo, there's some really, really brilliant people in the civil service who, if the quagmire was removed, if the sort of structural barriers was removed, they could lead this very well and engage us in the private sector, and we could go quickly. So I just want to acknowledge something you said yesterday, and maybe take an opportunity now to thank those hardworking public servants who know that they could help us with this if they were given the right system to work in.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much to the public servants in the room. So I'm sensitive to the time. We said then that if we'd gone through those first 5 steps, we define success, we stop the blame game, we get to the root causes, we're working with correct assumptions, and we identify the right stakeholders, and we have a leader. You as panelists believe we could come up with a long-term workforce development strategy and a human capital plan. I want to touch on that for just a bit. What would that do for us as a country if we had that? Or what might it look like?
Well, I think, one of the things that it would do is to, again, create that cohesion that we talked about. You remove the silos from what's happening today, and enable all of the stakeholders to collectively, it's important to get everybody around the table. It's important to have the right people. And I think Governor Owen talked about this. Getting more people involved in the decision making, getting the right people involved in the decision making, and helping to come up with what that looks like, what that, where do we want to go, and how do we get there. So again, I think it comes back to getting the right people around the table, building that cohesion, breaking down the barriers, especially when we talk about communication and sharing information and working collectively and collaboratively together.
Yeah. Okay. And as a group, you had 7 steps. The final step was to measure what matters, which means what exactly in the context of workforce development?
Well, it links back to the first point that we talked about, which is, we want to understand what success looks like. And one of the things that we talked about is once we define success, we have to figure out how do we measure that? How do we know that we are making progress towards our goals? How do we know that we're heading in the right direction? So from the very beginning, we have to determine what's the data, what are the data, what are the statistics, where do we get that from, how do we measure this?
Anything else?
Well, I'll give an example from my cartoon brain. I was having one of my many arguments with somebody in education a number of years ago, and we were, anyway, they said, Woody, you are too impatient. You need to give us 10 years. I was like, bro, I will give you 10 years, but what I'm not going to do is go away and come back in 10 years. I need you to tell me every quarter, every year, what it is that you're doing to actually achieve where it is that you're going to get at the end of the 10 years. But don't expect me to vanish and come back in 10 years, because I know what will happen, nothing.
Yeah.
So in terms of measuring what matters and knowing the definition of success, we need to know the roadmap of how we're going to get there. Now, it may change, it may tweak, it may do whatever it needs to do, but you need to have a plan that's mapped out that you then measure and hold people accountable along the way.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
And the accountability we talked about is, holding people accountable is not to punish them, but it's to make sure that they're resourced properly and that they have the guardrails and that they're going in the right direction. Accountability seems to have become a bad word, right? But it can also be for us to know that it's working so we can put more resources to it, or we know that isn't working, so we need to adapt. So if we summarize the roadmap, there's 7 steps to this. And I would like to invite the audience to just think about the fact that we don't want to look backwards, we want to look forward. You have 2 panelists who, between them, have a lot of experience, both in their professional lives and what they do in terms of volunteering, who've shared a perspective. This is based on your discussions with industry associations, with learning organizations, membership associations. So I'd invite the audience to really give this consideration, chamber, the government, to consider this. It may not be the right time to start right now, but we certainly should be able, if we're here next year at the Chamber Forum, to be able to have a presentation on who is leading this initiative, how far have we come, who are the stakeholders around the room, and that we have made significant progress. I think that's the challenge to all of us, to make sure that if we're here next January, God's willing, we are not talking about this anymore. There is a strategy group, there is a clear leader, and work is underway. Now, I promise you we're not copying the governor. We actually talked about this yesterday, that the panel has shared with you what needs to be done at a national level. And that's obviously going to take the work of organizations coming together and collaborating. But we didn't want to leave today without thinking about what we could do right now. So I'm going to ask you, Juliette, perhaps, to share what do you think those of us in the room could do right now, this week, to make a change and to improve our chances of getting a better workforce?
So I would say my challenge would be to the employers in the room to either start or increase the opportunities that you provide young Caymanians to come in to your workplace and gain experience. And this could be in a number of different forms. You know, it could be in apprenticeship programs, it could be in internship programs, it could be summer employment programs, it could be just coming in to do a project. But give young people opportunities to gain these soft skills and gain the experience that we're talking about, that you're talking about needing. And, you know, one of the things that we found, again, going back to last year when I chaired the Business Staffing Plan Board for a period, one of the gaps that we saw was there seems to be a lack of transition opportunities. You know, we have our young people that are coming out of schools at various points, or educational institutions at various points, and then we are expecting that they're going to come out of school, start work, and become the perfect employee. And a 1 day or even a 1 week orientation is not going to achieve that. So it's building those relationships, starting out, you know, some of the best success stories that I can think of in terms of young Caymanians coming into various workplaces and being successful is when those relationships started from the time that young person was in school, coming in to do projects, coming in to do summer jobs. And, you know, I even remember one of the initiatives that was in place when I first started in the industry, 1 day a year, the Hyatt that I was working at would bring in a group of young people, I think they were about 12 years old, from one of the schools. So pick one school, one class, one group of people. And for a day, they would be assigned to different employees to shadow the employees around the hotel. And we had a little orientation and gave them cookies, and they always looked forward to that. But what struck me was years later, when this 12-year-old then became 16, 15, 16, 17, and that those individuals are looking for summer jobs, you know, some of them, not everybody, but some of them would come in, and one of the questions we'd ask is, well, you know, what prompted you to come and apply for a job here? And every once in a while, and it would blow me out of the water, I'd get a response to the effect of, well, miss, you remember the day that our class came and we spent the day here and, you know, you gave us cookies and yeah, it was fun and I wanted to come and, you know, see more about that.
You bribed them?
Yeah, I bribed them, yeah.
She made them feel welcome.
But you just never know the importance of one of those interactions and how impactful that can be, especially in a young person. So create more of those opportunities would be my challenge.
Perfect. And in the minute that we have left, Woody, what is your challenge to the audience?
Well, I had two. So parents, again, you do play a role, as I mentioned earlier. So I'll give you another little story. We have a bagger program. You see baggers in our stores, for those of you that shop with us, thank you. It's a very successful program, and we know that because we have a waiting list of people that want to get in. And it teaches discipline, it teaches the kids how to deal with money, they get to interact with other people instead of just their peer group. There's all of these wins. Great program. We have parents who get mad at us because we terminate baggers. If they don't show up to work, if they're late, whatever, we'll fire them. And then we have parents, every once in a while, we have a parent come in and they start and argue with us and says, but they're children. So we know what they are, but we have a responsibility to this job, and you have signed them up to that. And you knew they were going to travel, or you knew they had football. Why didn't you do something about not making us put them on the schedule? Then they wouldn't have been fired. So look at yourself. So that's just an example, but you can apply that to anything. We as parents have a role to play in that. So just remember that. The other one that I have is on business. Businesses. I work a lot with Michael Miles and think he does an amazing job at Inspire Cayman, because he's dealing with a lot of at-risk Caymanians who a lot of us don't want to deal with. And so he has a really tough job, and he's had some amazing wins. And so as I read some of those wins and look at those, I'm like really in awe of what he does. But I also equally know how hard it is. And I read a book recently called Carry On. Write it down. It's really a good book. And what it's about, really briefly, because I know I only had a minute, so I apologize, but it's about two wrestlers, two high school wrestlers. One is legally blind and one has no legs. Wrestling. Seriously? But these dudes are actually good. And so what it's about, really, and I'll break it down really fast and then get to why I think that this is important to you today, is somebody came in to video them. The video went viral, and it was amazing, doing great things. A pile of money came in, and it was like opportunity, win. Problem was, they didn't know what to do with this opportunity. They were wasting the money. It was a mess. What saved them was the lady that made it all happen, the newscaster that made it all happen in the first place. She didn't just cut bait. She stuck with them. And it was through her resilience as somebody that's dealing with that risk, which most of us, once we write the check, we cut bait. For those of us that have a little bit more resilience than that, once to go and get stuff, we're like, well, I gave them the opportunity, that's on them. She pushed through that. And because of that, they succeeded. It's a good book. Read it, and it'll apply to what we're talking about today.
Thank you very much. In our final slide, we wanted to just say to you that we believe Cayman's at an inflection point. We have talked about this for decades, but we can't. Between economic growth that is before us, the population growth that's before us, artificial intelligence, shifting demographics, hybrid work, we really have to do it now. We cannot wait. We should not make excuses. And so the challenge is for us to do as Gandhi suggested we do. We need to be the change that we wish to see. And I look forward to being invited back next year to receive a presentation on Cayman's emerging workforce development strategy. Thank you very much for having us.